Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Have a little diet root beer here. That's refreshing. That's good stuff. You know, one of my favorite things as a game master is when I have all these hints and clues and ambiguous uh, bits of flotsam and jetsam in the environment, and players start to put together all the pieces and start to figure things out and start to come to the correct conclusion about what's really going on. I really love that as a game master. This joy is eclipsed only by the even greater joy when the players put together all these clues in the environment and guess wrong. I love that. That's even better. This is going to be a video response to Runeslinger's video on ambiguity, and he talked about it mostly being ambiguity in combat. He made a couple videos on combat recently. It was really cool in this last video he made, which is a response to, because he's using examples from the session, the solo session that we just played. There's a couple combats in that, which are rather ambiguous in terms of what's really going on. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about my perspectives on ambiguity and my perspectives as a player in those situations. You know, what was my character thinking? What was I thinking? Because Anthony talks about that separation between what the character knows, what the player knows, and still, you know, how ambiguous it is. Like, did I pick up on everything that he threw out there? Did I miss some things? Which, you know, just can be a lot of fun. And I really enjoy like finding things out that I missed. And I enjoy it when, you know, my players miss things as well. I've got right now at least 2 games. There are things that some players have missed. There's some things that players have put together. They put together some pieces and gotten things completely wrong. And there's some things they put together where they got it right. And, you know, I find both of these entertaining, but I'm not going to tell them which is which. And yes, there are times I'm really kind of just chuckling, not because it's a sinister. I'm the the game master, just rubbing his hands together, waiting for that moment where I destroy the characters. It's kind of funny that they're going off on this other direction. Sometimes going in a direction that I just had no idea they would go in terms of their logic and piecing together events and what they think is going on, which I think is it's fun. Because things can be ambiguous on the game master's side as well. Sometimes you're not really sure what the players are going to think of, or what the clues that you put out there, or just the things you said. What that's going to trigger in their heads. So probably a different subject, but anyhow, I really love ambiguity in games. I love it when things are mysterious. I love it when people need to figure things out. I don't have the best poker face in the entire world, so. Just there you have it. So sometimes as a game master, it's harder for me to conceal my joy when players are really going off on the wrong tangent. But I try to do my best. But I like being fooled as well. I like it when I have missed things. I'm not the best at intrigue ever. That's not my strong suit. But here, the funny thing is the character I was playing in the session, Philippe, he's even worse at intrigue than I am. So that was kind of fun, and I've noticed. I didn't really think about this before, but when I play characters, I really kind of get into character, not necessarily talking like them and all that kind of stuff. But I start to think like they think, and I've noticed that more and more about myself. So sometimes, I don't know if part of it is a little bit of bleed out, maybe not emotionally, but just where I really kind of take on the perceptions and perspectives of this character. And sometimes I might miss some things just because I'm so into that character at that particular moment. Anyhow, that's probably a big digression. But, Anthony talked about the idea that combats can be ambiguous in terms of, like, what are they really about? What's really going on? Why did this just happen? Was the combat there just to be a combat? Just to have it in a because we expect some combat in a game where it's a swashbuckling game, so there ought to be a little bit of swashbuckling and jumping around and all that kind of daring do. I know for a long time, and I still have this mindset that many of the things that I put into the environment as a game master are there simply because they make sense, and they are not there to provoke combat. Combat may happen, but they're not there for a specific feel or mood or to tease anything out of the players necessarily. And my default setting, when I'm setting up a world, is okay. Where do these things make sense? I'll put these particular creatures or things or people or whatever kind of tension there because that's where it should be. Where else would it possibly be? However, it was interesting to hear him talk about the ambiguous nature of these, for lack of a better word, encounters. Why do these encounters happen? And so there were two two combats that I got involved in, or well, they're encounters when it comes right down to it. The first one was I'm sitting there with my young charge, Pierre, Armand, but he's calling himself Pierre, and he's a student that's come to the Runeslinger Academy. I've been charged with taking care of this, kid in terms of his education. He asked me to escort him home. It's clear that he's afraid of somebody. He says there's somebody that's out to get his family, another family member, and he feels he's being followed and harassed. And so at one point we're going to his house. I'm escorting him home, and the way the scene was structured or set up, at least from what I heard, was that the streets of Paris sometimes get blocked. And young Pierre said, well, there's this alleyway here, this is a shortcut. But yeah, then he hesitates about going in there because it's kind of dangerous, and my character's a thrill seeker. And plus, I'm thinking, what the heck? I'm a musketeer. I'm pretty badass. We're going this way. It'll be great. It'll be fun. I get thrown a style point. So I automatically know. Maybe I'll get a style point just for playing up to my nature, but maybe I'll get a style point because it's going to get me in trouble. That's part of the Ubiquity rules too. Yeah, and I know something's going to happen at that point. It seems pretty inevitable. And sure enough, we get set upon by a bunch of vagabonds and ruffians. And a few interesting things happen during this scene. The first one is I am completely unable to use the environment. And Anthony does this great job describing what's in the environment. I'm dutifully writing everything down. I actually, you can't see what I'm doing in the Hangout, but I have a piece of paper. I kind of sketch it out. I kind of put down, okay, here's where the crates are and the broken barrels, and here's the destroyed furniture across from me, and here's the empty the sewer grating off the entrance to the sewer, and these other exits, and I realize, okay, there's a great setup for somebody like me, which I cannot use because I'm protecting this kid, who also freezes during the combat. So I can't even take him by the hand and say, do this, do that, let's run over here. Nothing. He's anchored to the floor, so I'm tethered to him. So it was like kind of being like on a diet, but in the middle of a donut shop. You can see all the pastries, you just can't eat them. That was kind of interesting. But the more ambiguous nature of the combat was, why were these guys there? Why did they just set upon us all of a sudden? Because it was immediate. And to be honest, my character really didn't think that much of it. Partly because also a perception roll is called for, and the only thing my perception roll of 1 out of a possible 5 really turned up was that I didn't think anybody was hiding any place, which I still, as a player, wasn't entirely convinced that was the case, because there was definitely some areas where somebody could be hiding, so that was always kind of in the back of my mind as a player. But I wasn't able to discern or suss out anything else about the scene, so I kind of kept that in the back of my head as a player. And Philippe blissfully went on and fought these ruffians, and really didn't start to put things together until after he questioned one of them, and one of the guys that was still alive. And the guy said, I'm asking him, who put you up to this? Because he's still going on this assumption that maybe Pierre is right, and maybe he did put, somebody has put these guys up to this and set them upon him. And the guy's just talking about the fact that he's wearing clothes that would feed his family for a year. And so I knock him out. And slowly Philippe starts to put 2 and 2 together. That maybe it's just that Pierre is rich. He's stupid enough to walk around back alleys in Paris, not realizing that's going to attract a lot of attention. One of the things that Anthony pointed out in his video, though, was, what if this was a setup? What if this kid was just trying to see how loyal I was, or how well I could fight? That was something that hadn't really crossed my mind that much, even as a player. And I kind of smiled and chuckled when he said that. I'm like, I missed that one. That was definitely a possibility. And likewise, there's that point, the part where they just kind of set upon us right away. But from Philippe's standpoint, and a little bit from mine, it was like, okay, well, that's probably the kind of stuff that's going to happen in these alleyways anyway. They're just waiting for passersby. And but Pierre kind of knew that this was a dangerous spot. So it was one of those sort of ambiguous, why did this combat happen? Why did this encounter happen? To me, I took a lot of it at face value, but it was interesting to go back and think about it some more, especially after watching Anthony's video. I was one of those things that really just didn't cross my mind, and maybe it was just the mindset I had about this young man, that I wasn't necessarily suspecting him of anything untoward or diabolical or have any kind of intrigue in this little young boy. I just saw him as a scared young boy. Anyhow, we get to the second combat, which is another interesting one, which with a trio of Cardinals guards. Now, we could just say the reason for this combat was it's time to have a combat with Cardinals guards because it's musketeery, And so that was certainly a consideration. However, they found us, right away. They kind of knew, who Pierre was, or at least were trying to figure out who Pierre was. They knew who I was, But I'm famous. I'm a famous musketeer, so that was definitely crossed Philippe's mind, and partly mine. But it was kind of odd that they just sort of kind of found us out of nowhere, and it seemed a little bit too contrived. Was this just a convenient combat to have for the sake of let's put this in the one shot so we can have that sort of combat, or was there something else going on? I found it interesting that it's possible, as Anthony mentioned, it's possible that somebody tipped them off. Well, who would have tipped them off? Would it have been Etienne at the croissant maker's place? Because he did have a conversation in front of us with the owner of the place. So perhaps he tipped him off, maybe. But it could have been another informant. Who would have tipped him off? And it could have been somebody at the Renoir Academy themselves. Could it have been Denis, who seemed like a fine, upstanding fellow? But perhaps is there something that he certainly knew that something was up with Pierre, that he was disguised. Could be. And the other thing that crosses my mind is maybe it could be the guy, the worst student in the academy that was there mopping the floor. Maybe the worst student in the academy is there just to be a spy. Who knows? But these levels of intrigue that can show up in games are, can be really interesting and a lot of fun. Maybe they don't mean a damn thing. Maybe all this speculation and supposition is really for naught. But that's this funny schism that happens, at least for me, is there's what my character picks up on, and there's what I pick up on. And often I find that if my character's not picking up on it, I kind of don't pay it as much attention as maybe I should. But of course, many of these things could be just blind alleyways. One of the really fun things I experienced in that session was the idea that other people were able to clue Philippe in to things, such as when Denis clued him into the fact that Pierre was wearing a disguise. And this was very matter of fact to him. The idea that Eugene was able to, let Philippe know that perhaps Pierre was feeling poorly and might need some emotional support after having frozen in a combat. And things where non-player characters are kind of the game master through these non-player characters is kind of providing more hints and clues, which is part of the whole thing of building up all this intrigue and ambiguity in a game. At least that's one of the techniques I like to use, is constantly kind of throwing people bits and pieces of information which may be just completely unrelated. It reminds me of the old rumor tables in old school games, where not all the stuff is really true, but with a little bit more panache, with a little bit more subtlety, a little bit more a thought behind it, rather than there's smugglers down by the cove that have this just octopus that can breathe fire, more than that. Oh, that's always fun. But just these different clues and misdirections, or perhaps not misdirections, so the game master can throw out. But I always really find it intriguing and fun to have that level of ambiguity in a game, as a game master and as a player. I don't like things to be black and white. I always like there to be a kind of like, hey, what else is going on? Are we missing something here? I love that feeling. It can be maddening, but I like that. Are we missing something here? One of the other things I thought of when I was thinking about this topic was that it's a lot easier to start thinking about all the possibilities. Sometimes it's a good thing, and sometimes it's a bad thing when you have 2 or 3 people at the table as opposed to just one. When you've got a bunch of people at the table and we all start kind of brainstorming, and did you notice this, and how about that? Did you think about this? Sometimes the group of players can come up with a really cogent explanation of why something's true and get the right answer. And of course, sometimes it can be absolute cacophony, and they go down this rabbit hole or down this other path that makes absolutely no sense. And as a game master, I'm always happy to let them do that. Not just because that's evil, but because, hey, that's what happens in real life sometimes. So yeah, I really enjoy the subject of ambiguity in role-playing games. I like it when you have to wonder, why did this just happen? I hadn't applied that as much in my thinking to combat, like why did this combat just happen? Why did this encounter just happen? All the time. But it is an intriguing way to look at it, or an intriguing thing to kind of throw into the pot when you're talking about ambiguity or thinking about creating that feel and that vibe. So, I'll probably have more to say about this at some point, but I just want to give my reactions in a longer video than I expected. But hey, sometimes I kind of just ramble. What do you want?